And hi, everyone. Welcome to eLearnChat, where you always learn something new. I'm Rick Zanatti, and I am joined today by Leslie Price, coming to us from just outside London. She's with learnappeal.org.uk. And in studio, we've got Harold Muliati. He is our video producer. Our guest today, I love his name, maybe because it's Italian, I'm not sure, but Marco Faccini, that's a great name. He is joining us again, and we're going to have a really good conversation. Here we go.
This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation. Digital learning development, media development, corporate video, management consulting, and more. Visit us at www.relate.com. Thanks.
And we are back, and in that center position of power, it's Marco Faccini again. How are you today, Marco?
I'm very good, Rick. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. And I must confess, do you know what? That must be the best pronunciation of my name ever.
Marco
and I'm
Faccini.
actually going to get you to do a sound bite, and I'm just going to use that whenever I do a speaking gig or go to a conference,
I will record
team meetings. I'm just going to play Rick Zanotti saying Marco Faccini.
Marco Faccini.
Italian.
Live today, it's Marco Faccini. That's a great name. I loved it. When I first read your name, I went, I love that name. That's a good one. And if I use my real name in the States, nobody would ever get my name right. Because my real name isn't Rick. That's been my nickname since I was a kid. They used to call me Ricky Ricardo because my real name is Ricardo. It's Riccardo Zanotti. So again, that Italian name come out. But I'm Rick. Everybody calls me Rick. Except when I go places and I'm having to show my legal and they go, Ricardo? Okay, and I just give up. And for a while, I tried to pronounce my name.
Whereas in Scotland, particularly in the west of Scotland, there are so many Italians living there.
Interesting.
That we just kind of grew up with it, you know.
Yep.
I didn't even, when I met Marco, I didn't even have to think. It's, you know, Marco Faccini.
Yep.
That's just the way life was for us in Scotland, because all the best ice cream shops were run by the Tallies.
Yeah, the creameries. Yes.
And it must be only the English who get it wrong then, because in my life I've been called Mark Faccini, so they think there's an apostrophe. I've been called Faccini,
Faccini,
all sorts of things, and it's English people. So it's interesting, isn't it? If we go back, we thought we owned the world back in the day, but I don't think we were as worldly and wisely travelled as we thought we once were.
No, but you have that great, almost James Bond-like name. I could see it. My name is Marco Faccini. And it would be perfect. It's a perfect name for a spy. I love it.
Oh, my God, Rick, don't tell us
I could come on every week. Just talk to me every week, Rick. I could work with you all day, every day.
Oh, we'd have fun. I'm sure we would have fun. Anyway, Marco, we've had a very interesting year. It's been probably the most insane year in human history for a lot of reasons. But what are your opinions on how it's affecting training? Everybody's gone remote. Everybody's got remote employees now. The training for a remote employee is definitely a challenge. And things aren't quite as simple as everybody thought. There's a lot of struggles, especially with big companies who are dealing with thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees remotely. In fact, before we start, Microsoft just announced that they're going 100% remote in the future. They're not having offices, which I don't know how they're going to do, because it's pretty hard to have software development teams that aren't even near each other, not to mention some social issues. But anyway, what do you think's going on, and how are we going to survive this?
Yeah, so it's interesting you use the word survive, because I actually don't look at it as survive. I actually look at this more as an enhancement, an advantage potentially. And COVID is not great, of course it's not, but I actually think from a learning and a training teaching perspective, maybe it's a bit of a wake-up call's too strong, because I think what is happening now, those evangelists, and I would be one of those evangelists, we've been sort of saying for years, well, why don't you do it this way? Why not try it this way? And it's always been kicked back because it's typically, oh no, I like to have our people in the office so I can see them and I can manage them, and we need the face-to-face piece. And don't get me wrong, I understand the face-to-face piece. You know, social interaction is important, but you don't need to be watching your people all the time. And in fact, if you're watching your people, then either there's something wrong with your management style or there's something wrong with your people, I would argue. But I think to answer your question and to give some context, so of course I wear many hats. So one of them is I'm a chief exec of Silkroad Edtech. So we're basically an investment vehicle. So we invest in newer technologies. Thank you very much. And we take that into the Belt and Road typically. And I do a lot of work in the US as well. But I'm also a non-exec director for an e-learning company, a traditional e-learning company, Praxis 42. And I'm a non-exec director for a extended realities, as we're calling it now, VR, AR, development company, who also have a platform like what we would term as an LMS, if you like, because we needed to have that sort of platform in the industry. So what I work in, if you like, is what I call a learning ecosystem, a pure learning ecosystem. Now, yes, I'm missing sort of face-to-face delivery in that portfolio, but that's not something that we would invest in anyway. You know, we invest in people, of course we do, but you can't sell people. You can sell products and services, if you like. So what I have, to answer your question, what I've sort of noticed is, and I think if there is a wake-up call, this is a wake-up call for those people in L&D, and it's about, due to COVID and the restrictions on trade for businesses, at the very forefront, and this is the biggest topic of conversation I have with fellow people who run businesses, and there'll be people who run businesses from $1 million to 100, 200 million, billion pounds, is whenever normal comes back to whatever normal is, we've got to look at costs and cutting costs, and your fixed costs. Yes, are your fixed costs, but is there some ways of alleviating those? And you know what? Apart from salaries, and of course you're always going to have salaries, your next biggest cost typically is your office space. Mm-hmm. And the topic of conversation is, well, if we had an office that housed 300 people, I can now see that people work well on their own. And actually, some of my people work even better from remotely. So I don't need to have a 300-person office. Maybe I have a 100-person office, and therefore I can cut down my rent and my leases, because they're going to have to cut costs somewhere, and that is going to be at the forefront of that cost cutting. Hopefully it's not people, it's just fixtures and fittings, if you like. So if that's going to happen, and I truly believe it will do, then we've got to look from a delivery perspective. How are we going to get effective learning and training and teaching to a more disparate workforce? Because we're just not going to have them coming into the offices anymore. And of course, there's going to be, I'm not going to use the word styles per se, people have different styles of learning, but we've got to look at the different modalities for people to utilize to, in effect, I think, get the ultimate outcome that we want for any learning interaction. Now, of course, one of those ultimates will be we want people to do learning to align to the business goals or aid the business goals, but also fundamentally part and parcel of that, and this is the word that's coming up more and more that I'm hearing, is behaviors. How are we going to instill and drive and push through and measure behaviors if we're going to do it all just online? So we don't think we can.
Marco, what about, right, so when I was...
So what are those modalities?
Yeah, sorry, to interrupt. I used to run a team where most of the people were actually remote workers. And also in the office, there was lots of people who, were very important to the overall functionality of the office, like the people on reception, so the people who were answering the calls, or whether it be maintenance or whether it be IT support. Now, if you're going on totally online, I appreciate that you're not necessarily going to have the maintenance aspects, but you're still going to have an IT team, and you're still going to have the people who are answering the calls. So the equivalent of, if you want to call it reception, they're not exactly the same. So how do you, and one of the things I always said that was absolutely mission critical was building relationships, positive relationships with people in different parts of the organization. And that could not be achieved by simply sending an email.
Do you know what? I totally agree. And email, I have a mantra about email. So I try not to use it very much, but I've had a long-held mantra about email. In that, email is where innovation goes to die. And what I mean by that is people have great ideas. It's a bit like you could be my boss, Leslie, and I have this great idea. And I email you and say, hey, I think we should build this kind of widget. And you'll email me back and go, yeah, that's great, but I'm a bit busy at the moment and we'll revisit this. But do you know what? You never revisit it because you've forgotten it. So that's what I mean by it's where it goes to die. So what I'm not talking about here is about email. And do you know what? And I call email lazy. I think for me, it's about, we have these devices, call people, video people. And I'm a huge fan, and I've always called people and video called people rather than send emails, if you like. So I think it's about we changing our behaviors, actually, which rather than be lazy, if you like, is pick up the phone and call somebody, or use your Teams or your Zoom or your Skype and have face-to-face. Because do you know what? Here's an interesting thing. Companies that have geographically dispersed offices have been doing that for years anyway.
Yeah.
Because you've got the cultural differences. I have this with China. If I sent to my colleagues in China an email, they'd ignore it because it's not cultural. It's not culturally right. So therefore, I have to call them. And in fact, I have to video call them because that is the accepted way of doing it. And actually, I look at that and go, I think that's actually the right way of doing it. We've just got lazy, got westernized, if you like, and got a little bit lazy. So I totally agree with you. But then that's down to us to change that behavior and be more proactive and actually be so proactive that rather than just you work in an organization and you might have regularly met people, just because we're not meeting them now, do you know what? Pick up the phone to them.
Yeah.
Pick up the phone to them. Communication is easy.
Before I was semi-retired, that's what we used to do all the time. That was our norm. And even now, but rather than email, we'll kind of WhatsApp each other or we'll message each other, which is different from sending an email.
Yeah. For me, I think Teams, I'm not the biggest fan of Zoom per se, and thankfully I've not used it a great deal, but I use Teams a huge amount. And actually it sort of aligns a little bit to your IT point you made, Leslie. Yes, if we go back probably even only 5 years, you had an office and you had a department in there that was called IT. But of course, We don't need that anymore. Those people don't need to be in the office anymore because everything is in the cloud. So everything is managed remotely. And, and a deliverable of that is, Microsoft's Teams. And I think Teams has been fantastic for communication. I look at it now and think just one of the businesses I work with, Praxis, the fact that I can just see there all the time, people are communicating on the instant messaging or they're on video calls and the like. I think it's just fantastic. And yes, it's not the same as having the face-to-face. So, it's like anything. There's always trade-offs, isn't there? So it's not the same as the face-to-face. But when I look at the amount of meetings I would be involved with, and I'd come away from those meetings thinking, A, did I really need to be there? B, did that meeting really need to be a meeting? And C, did it really need to be that long? That doesn't happen when it's remote communications. You don't have that sort of stuff. What's the biggest issue? Oh, you're on mute.
Hide. Just hide. Have a smile on your face and just be doing something else.
Yeah. But as I said, I think, if you look at it from the fact of, chief execs and boards of companies are going to look at costs to start with. There's no doubt about it. It's going to be on their priority list because they're not going to have made as much profits this year. I think this is a golden opportunity for the person responsible for L&D in that business to come forward and go, here's some thoughts. Here's some ideas, not about streamlining costs, but about just doing things in a different way to try and be as effective or even more effective now, because actually they're having to, and I'm saying having to embrace technology, because I would argue they've been a little bit reticent of embracing technology. And I think when I was with you guys, however long ago it was, a year, 18 months ago, I talked about the shiny toy syndrome. And of course, I always poo-pooed it. And I don't even know where that came from or where people's thinking came from that. Because, Leslie, you and I and Rick, we've been around long enough. If we always applied the shiny toy syndrome to something and never tried it, do you know what? We wouldn't be where we are now, that's for sure. Because other people would have grasped it and run ahead and built great businesses. So you have to pilot and try these things.
Yo-yos,
do you know what?
though.
They're being forced to pilot and try these things.
Yeah, but I do still like yo-yos, and I can still run my yo-yo along the floor.
Can you do it around the world?
Now, can you two boys do that?
I used to be able to do a lot of yo-yo tricks. Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day. I could do all sorts of tricks.
Hula hoops,
Yeah.
And I don't mean the hula hoops you eat. I mean the hula hoops you kept round your waist.
Yeah, the hula hoops. Yeah.
In our day, I know it's going to sound stupid, but in our day, that was actually, it's going to sound crazy, but that was actually new technology. Being able to run a hula hoop round your waist and keep it going, being able to then with a yo-yo make it go across. I mean, and when anything came on television, it was wow, and there were only 2 or 3 channels. I don't know what it was like in the States, Rick, but certainly in the UK, up until the late 1960s, there was only, I think there was 3 channels, wasn't there, in the 1960s, Marco?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and we had about probably 10 or 15. It wasn't much more.
Yeah. But then when you've got, what you've got now is the equivalent of however many 100 channels. So not just what people are seeing online, but in all the potential meetings and everything else they could be in, they have to make decisions about which one am I going to join? Which one am I going to be part of? So how do people make that decision, Marco?
Same way as they've done before, isn't it? Isn't that where you discuss with your colleagues or your peers, or you solicit opinions?
Also
it's no
online?
different, is it? It's no different than whether you did it face to face or whether you do it online, isn't it? You've seen it. We can use Facebook as an example. We're not talking about anything new here. We're just talking about it is everything that is happening now is in a different context, and it's the business context. But we as consumers, we as individuals, we've been doing everything we're doing in business now for years. So to your point, Leslie, I'll use the example of Facebook. And I think I've seen you do it when you were renovating your house. You put a post on Facebook and said, can anyone recommend a good painter or a good builder or whatever it was?
Oh, no, I didn't. I had them all, but I put up lots of pictures.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. You see it, your friends will ask for a recommendation. So for me, we've been doing it for years. We're just now bringing the online communications, the online relationships, we're now just bringing them into a business context.
And it's interesting, getting back to your point about working remotely and not needing so much space. In the States, I've read some articles that one of the biggest, victims of COVID and remoteness, if you will, is that the commercial real estate market, they said, will probably take 20 years to regain momentum at this point. That's what they're saying. There's an excess of real estate right now. And a lot of companies, especially big ones, are really starting to pare it down. We work with one that's a multi-billion dollar, about $100 billion banking operation, and they are probably closing some of their offices because they've just moved where people go and how they go. They're going to keep people remote more than they were, a lot more, maybe 50% more. So it's interesting. Yeah. So that's going to be a change in the construction market, the development market. What will happen there? The owners who have properties are suddenly going to be having a lot of money lost on rents and everything else. So it's an interesting change. I don't know if that's going to be worldwide, but I suspect it probably will be.
Yeah, I mean, it's also going to hurt pension funds.
Yes.
But it's like anything, though, Rick, isn't it? So that's a downside.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that, but do you know what? I'm more happy about the upside.
Mm-hmm.
And the upside for me is this is going to be so much more environmentally friendly. So do you know what? We as a populace, we're now doing our bit to save the planet because we're not building so much and we're not traveling so much. So that is going to have a huge impact on the environment. So it goes back to my point about trade-offs, which is the bigger trade-off?
Yeah. And if you live in a city like where we do, we're not far from Los Angeles, you can spend 3 hours a day minimum in your car going to work and back. Some people have 5-hour-a-day commutes. That's no life. And now they're working from home. They've just earned 5 extra hours. Now they know, I have a family. I didn't know that. It's amazing. Yeah. So from that point of view, I totally agree. Yeah.
I saw back in June or July or something, and I'm a person that for 7 or 8 years I would leave my home, travel to London, which is 3 hours away. I'd travel on a Monday morning at 4:30 and then come back on a Thursday at 7 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So for 7 years of my kids' life, I missed a big chunk of their life. Right. And I saw a comment. It was about June or July time, so we're in the middle of the pandemic, from a man on Twitter or somewhere complaining about the fact that he was getting fed up of being in meetings and his kids running into the meeting. And I just looked at that, and I don't comment, I'll be honest, but I just looked at that and go, do you know what? If that's the biggest issue in your life, then there is something wrong, my friend, because I would have given everything to be at home with my children. And I just look at it and go, again, it's people use the word reset, and I don't want to get on a whole COVID thing. And maybe it is a reset. I'd like to think it is a bit of a reset, but a reset from behaviors, human behaviors, in that, you have children not to be a thing. They're your children. So interact with them, be with them, and live with them, and see them grow. And, don't complain about them bumping into your Zoom meeting.
Yeah, it's funny.
Just just to share with the audience, before the show, my daughter was here picking up my grandson, and she was chatting and waving to Marco, because I'm one of these crazy mothers that actually introduced both her children to loads of people in the learning technology community. So Marco actually knows both my kids and has done for quite a few years.
Yeah.
No, and definitely dogs and cats are much happier that we're home. So that's another thing. Marco, what do you think about the communication part? Okay, if we talk at the executive level, at the upper management level, or even managers, it's a different mindset. What about the rank and file? What about the customer service workers, the people who work from home? They're on the phones a lot. They have a hard time. A lot of companies are saying, and I know some that have actually fired people who said, if you cannot control your house, a noise you have or whatever, then it's not going to work. And that's happened. There is an issue at some levels where they want it to be professional. They want it to be like they're in an office, but they're at home. What do you think about that? And what do you think? And also for those people, the chances of moving up will be more difficult because they have less interactions or less ability to know what's going on to be able to maybe move up. That's just one thing I've been thinking about a little bit. How do you work at that level?
Yeah, and Rick, do you know what? That's a great point of view, and it's one that I think a lot about, and I don't have the answers just yet. But what I will say to that is, and you're not the first, I mean, you're the first to put it so eloquently, by the way, but it came up a few weeks ago. Somebody asked me that same question, more about it's not conducive for everybody to work at their homes because, hey, they might be in a one-bedroom flat, for example.
Yeah.
And do you know what? And I don't mean to be, I am a caring man, don't get me wrong, but my response was, as a business owner, tough.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that literally, tough. Yeah. Well, I do mean tough, but what I mean is, I'll soften that slightly. If the difference is between the business making a profit or the business surviving, we all have to make sacrifices, and it isn't great. It isn't great.
Right.
But do you know what, Rick? I remember starting a business 20 years ago, and I ate, so it's Walmart in the US, so it's Asda here. So Leslie will know this. I remember eating Walmart/Asda Smart Price baked beans because they were 3p a tin. So that's what I used to eat for days, not days on end, but every few days my wife and I would have Smart Price baked beans because we were building a business. Now, do you know what? I'd love to eat a pasty, but I couldn't go and buy the pasty. I'd love to have ate something else, but we couldn't afford it. That's what we do. So my point is, we all have to make sacrifices, and I'm not going to do the whole generational thing because that's like your dad preaching to your kids type thing. But I do wonder sometimes, and this isn't a broad brush, but and I've got a kid who's 19 and 20. I've got children 19, 20, and 27, and it's been a healthy debate in our house. And actually, thankfully, they agree with me. Maybe they do that because I'm dad. But I've said to them, you're the entitled generation. So if you had to work in a one-bedroom flat, how would you think? Well, I wouldn't like it, Dad. I'd complain, Dad, and I might quit my job, Dad. And I went, okay, and I give them my scenario of the baked beans, and it sort of just glosses over their heads. But I'm trying to make a relative point that it's not ideal. Of course it's not. But if it's about the business surviving or the business making a profit, then we've got to make those sacrifices.
Sure. Yep,
it's not ideal, but nothing is ideal in the world. If it was ideal, if you, as individuals, if you're ideal, you'd be a millionaire or multi-millionaires, and you could choose and do what the hell you wanted. But not everybody is. So it's tough, Rick. But I think to really, so that's at the highest level, if you like. But I think we have to do something more for people that want to progress, people that are doing the jobs on the first rungs of the ladder, if you like. And that for me is where, again, we come in, as we've got to ensure we are doing the best by them. And the best by them is effective training, learning solutions, effective communication, and effective comms in relation to the business, in particular into the business. You know, and businesses typically have not been very good in this traditionally. It's like the board will sit and they will go, right, here are the business goals for the year. And we are going to turn over 10 million and we're going to make 1 million profit. And they'll brief that down to the managers and they'll go, this is what we're going to do. But there's no really distilling of what that means to each department. And those managers certainly don't distill it down to people in their teams.
Right.
You have to do that now. You have to, because I think if you do that now,
I totally and utterly agree. I totally and utterly agree, Marco, because it's a bit like with your children. You're only as good as the people that follow you. And within an organization, you know, an awful lot of people talk about the top-down approach, but at the end of the day, the people who are at the top will eventually leave. And if they haven't grown the people from the bottom up, nothing will progress. Nothing will actually happen. You'll bring in a whole lot of new people and then you're back to phase one again.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have a few mantras that I live by in business. And to that point, Leslie, I have one in regards to leadership. And I hate people calling me boss. And I hate, not so much now, but when you go to meetings and people go, oh, he's my boss or he's the chief exec. I hate that. And I always jump over and I say to people, no, you introduce me as Marco, your colleague. Titles not relevant. And what I say to people in my teams is I say, you know, my role, yes, I am the leader because my business and, you know, etc. But I look up and go, my role as a leader is to make you successful and to make you successful as quickly as possible. Because if you are successful, this business is successful, and my work here is done.
Okay. You can retire.
Sorry?
She said you can retire.
Again.
Now, I still maintain that with your name, all you have to do is say, when they introduce, they say, I am Marco Faccini. That's it. You're done. You're done. That's great. They'll go, ooh. And it's wonderful. You know, one of the things they're doing here, and I think this is happening all over, they're trying to address the lower echelon of workers, the ones who are the hourlies who, you know, don't get a lot of recognition or whatever. They just do their jobs. They're just there maybe temporarily. They're creating smaller work environments, maybe where only 10, 20, 30 people are. And that way they're still getting some collaboration with other people, some closeness to other people, but these are closer to their homes, closer to whatever, and they don't have to work at home if they don't have the facilities. That's what some companies are doing. And they said that works pretty well. It's just getting some small workspaces that are very cheap compared to buying, you know, getting these humongous, gorgeous buildings, and maybe that works better. One thing I've hated when I've worked in places, I've never liked skyscrapers. Well, probably being in Los Angeles, when you're in a skyscraper and there's an earthquake, it's not a pleasant feeling. I've been through a couple. And, you're 40, 50 stories up and your desk is moving 5 feet each way. That's not fun. But to me, the skyscrapers have always been a bad idea. I prefer more what they call the college campus approach. We have smaller buildings, lots of them, versus huge sky rises. But that's just personal preference and taste. But I think a lot of that in the old days, and probably even today, is the show-off quality, the marketing. Look where my offices are. And I don't think that's all that important anymore.
No, and maybe our perceptions as humans is maybe, because I thinking about it now, of course, you're almost talking back to the era of greed is good.
Mm-hmm.
So Gordon Gekko, wasn't it? And I think we have moved on, thankfully, and we have grown as species, if you like, that it's okay to have greed, but, it's got to be relative.
Yeah.
And I think, your car is bigger than mine, your house is bigger than mine, your building is bigger than mine, and I've got more floors. I think that's for the uber rich. Mm-hmm. And I think we are better humans than that nowadays. So I think it's a very good point. It's interesting you mentioned that. I hadn't even considered it. When I think about just a call I had today, somebody brand new, potential client. When you think about the questions they asked you, one of them is not about your office, your people. It's actually about your work, your quality of your work, your credibility, your authenticity. They're the things. And do you know what the lady said to me? Here was the key point. I think we can work with you and your people, Marco. That's building doesn't come into it. Car or anything like that doesn't come into it.
No, in fact, a lot of times it's about trust. Trust today is probably more important than
work.
Yeah, all about trust. I know when we get introduced, that one client we have, which we've been at for quite a few years, like 17 years already, many times they introduce us as, oh, this is Rick Zanotti, he's a trusted vendor. Oh, that's a nice, to me, that's like, wow, you couldn't have said anything nicer to us. We're a trusted vendor, and that's where you feel good. We've achieved trust. And if you can achieve trust, boy, you never want to lose that trust. But trust is important, and that's the same with remote working. If you can achieve trust, then the remote workers will probably maybe move up based on their own qualifications, the amount of work they do, the quality of work they do. People will begin to trust them. The managers or supervisors, when they see people they trust, will start considering more for more responsibility.
Yeah, but I think it's also, again, it's about, people do this, they just look at it through the one lens. Mm-hmm. If I was not doing to a certain degree, I've been living it for a number of years anyway. So, I've always struggled with the phrase work-life balance. I've always struggled with that. And going back to where I said about I used to travel to London all the time in the corporate world, yes, that's absolutely. But do you know what? When Mind Leaders was sold, when we sold, and I became more Buddhist in my thinking, if I dare say it, I came to realize that actually it's more about life-work balance. So, up until the pandemic, I would try and work a sort of 2-3 day week scenario. So not retired, Leslie, because I joked, I've tried that and it didn't work. So I'm a person that still needs to do some work. But actually, it's about, choosing when you can work and how long you work for. And I look at it and think, if I was doing I was on that rung of the ladder again and I was being asked to work from home. Here is a golden opportunity potentially to have life-work balance. Because if I was still outputting the amount of effort and the outcomes as I did when I was in the office in the same amount of time, and to your point, Rick, I've got no travel time anymore. I don't necessarily need to have as long a lunch break. I'm certainly not doing the coffee breaks. people go, oh, I missed the coffee breaks. Well, actually, and I'd see it every single day. You had a coffee break just so you could have a natter for 15, 20 minutes, and your half an hour lunch, your hour lunch turned into an hour and a half. Well, actually, if you circumvent that all down, you might be able to do your amount of work that you did in the office in, say, 4 or 5 hours. Mm-hmm. Do you know what? If I was doing 4 or 5 hour days, I'd be pretty damn happy because I could get around to golfing every single day.
And also, I have some advice for people who work at home.
Cool.
And some advice for people who work at home. Buy a water cooler. Put it next to your desk. You'll feel you're at the office. It's a simple thing.
I'm sorry, guys. I know, I hear what you're saying, but I'm very much a face-to-face people person. Always have been. Don't think that's ever going to change. And yes, I've been doing this with Rick for quite a few years now, but I still really, really miss actually meeting people, because what I think doesn't happen in the online stuff or the Zoom chats or the Microsoft meetings, whatever, is the casual conversation.
Right.
It's like it's the conversation you're having always seems to have a purpose. Now, I altered, as you know, that I altered that today by saying to my dear daughter, oh, Marco's on. Don't you want to, stay for a few minutes and say hi to Marco? But if I wasn't the type of person I am, and I didn't know that Marco is the type of person that he is, so he would immediately go, oh yeah, Natalie, isn't it lovely to see you? And isn't it lovely to see your son? Would you do it? And I'm not convinced that you would.
It's a good point. I'm just gonna. I agree with you, Leslie, and I'm also like you. And of course, what I'm about to say would be ripped to pieces by the academics in the world, because it's not gone through the robustness of any academic research or the criteria. But one of my companies, we did a survey, because what I'm about to say, you're liking your thinking, Leslie, a bit like mine. I wonder if it's a generational thing. Because we did a survey with one of my companies, and I can tell you right now, age group 18 to 13, and the question was about, do you prefer to be in the office or working from home? And there were other questions around meetings and chit chats, etc. 18 to 30 to a person said weren't bothered about coming into the office.
Mm-hmm.
It was the 40 pluses who said, I'd much rather come into the office. I prefer to be in the office. So, it's as I said, academics would rip it to pieces, but we wanted to sense check their temperature. Yep. We wanted to see where people's was at. And it was stark to me that 18 to 30s were, don't need to come in the office. It's fine.
I totally get that, Marco. And when I was working, for government, and I was working for the Learning Performance Institute, I did an awful lot of working from home. And my team, when I was working for government, I would say 85% of them worked from home. So, and they were all ages, and I was a good deal younger then than I am now. But I still think that there is, whilst I can appreciate that we need to do more with improving online learning, and I mean learning and behaviors rather than training and teaching, I also think that there is a significant place for meeting people in person.
But I think it's what Marco said right at the beginning. And this too shall change. It's a cycle. Right now, the cycle is probably more distance, not so close. And that'll change. Who knows when? It may be in our lifetime, maybe later, but it'll change. That's just the nature of life. And with that, we are actually, we're pretty out of time. We've been out of time for 14 minutes, but that's okay. We always go out of time. Marco, as always, a real pleasure having you on. It's a great conversation. And like I said, your name does it all. Just being Marco Faccini, you're done. You're great. Success. And we really do appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. And Leslie, as always nice to see the family on the other side every so often. And I think it's great. And by the way, I really enjoy going to lunch because we got to see everybody in person. That was fun. Marco, I saw you for about 1 second, I think, or two. Somebody tapped you. I think it was Leslie, and she goes, "That's Rick." And you turned around, you waved, and I said hi, and you turned around and left.
We were at the pub.
I went,
we were at the pub.
I know.
Yeah, you were on your way out. And it was like, that was quick. And I'm not a good mingler at a bar, so I'm like, okay, I'll just stand and watch everybody. But no, it's great to see people and meet people and have a good time. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on again. You'll be on again. We can bring you on as many times as you want, so don't worry about that. And if you're watching the show, please subscribe, give us feedback, get in on the conversation below. If there's any, get involved. And we will see you next week on eLearnChat. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.